kind of an extraordinary transformation when you leave Stanford and 24 hours later you're leaving a plane in Kabul, having passed through Dubai and all the glitz and sort of tall buildings there, and you get off and it's snowing and there's mud everywhere and there's puddles, and you wheel your luggage out through this abandoned parking lot, and everybody who got off the plane is a military contractor with short hair.
What's the sign say? You have to.
The sign says,
the sign says.
Welcome to the land of the brave.
Yeah.
And
no home of the free. Just land of the brave.
And you get in this white minivan and drive like a banshee through the streets of Kabul because there's no traffic laws. It's just a total free-for-all. And you look out and you see this just totally different environment than you've ever seen before. It's sort of booming with glass encased buildings in some parts of it, and large strips of it are just rubble and pockmarked with bullet marks or whatever, and it's just a totally different environment.
It's also really striking how there are walls everywhere, and there are men in the streets and a few women, not so many, but kind of everything's behind walls. And then once you get into a home or a school or any more private place, I think that's where the real Afghanistan is. And the people really become themselves when they're in their own homes, and parties are like any other party, minus the alcohol, but people are really happy to see one another and very loving and emotional and talkative, and there's this vibrant culture. It just happens behind closed doors, which is so different than what we're used to here. We gave a guest lecture, at just kind of explaining our project and who we were and what we were there to do, and how we wrote the textbooks. And we got some pushback from, which I think is very deserved, from students who wanted to know, how we knew anything about Afghanistan and what we were doing writing these textbooks. And we explained that we have people who do know a lot more than we do about Afghanistan who vet them, and that we spend a lot of time researching and becoming acquainted with the country and trying to do the best we can to accurately reflect their lives in our textbooks. And so we had that public lecture with them, and then afterwards, after a class that we watched one of our professors teach, we sat down with them in small groups, and I think that was the most interesting part, was to get to know them and why they were taking the classes and what they liked about them. And they just come from such varied backgrounds. I know I met one student who worked for Afghan radio and wanted to know more about the laws of Afghanistan because he was constantly reporting on political and legal activity in the country and really wanted to be able to better understand what he was reporting on. So that was really interesting, not something that I expected.
We met with a number of students who come from just really different backgrounds than we do, obviously. I think most of them, or a lot of them, grew up in refugee camps in Pakistan or India, and they've come back to Afghanistan, post-Taliban, for starting again, and a chance at a different style of education. And we met people who weren't English speakers, but who were trying to learn English and using our books as one way to learn legal English. And they were all just incredibly driven. The amount of time and effort they were putting into whatever they were trying to achieve was very refreshing to see. We heard students say that, look, if we don't have to read a paragraph 2 or 3 times, it's not difficult enough for us. Like, we really want to be challenged at a college level. Don't treat us like we're just high school students. This is Afghanistan, but we're college students, and we're here to get the best education we can.
All of our classes are taught at the American University of Afghanistan, and then we had the fortunate surprise, actually, of going to Kabul the last week of a program run by USAID called Academic Legal English, where they were also using our books, but for a different purpose. They were teaching English to graduates of other law schools throughout Afghanistan, and so we were also able to talk to their students and get their reactions to our books and hear who they were and what their plans were. And I don't think their plans differed that much from the students at AUAF, but on the whole, they seemed more likely to be looking to go to more school. But that might be because they graduated and they were realizing that there weren't jobs, and our students just haven't graduated and come to that realization yet.
A lot of the students are already working, and so they're in school sort of part-time at night. So some of them, I think, will return to what they're doing, working in government ministries, working in nonprofits. I think a number of others will potentially go on to work for the prosecution office. There's not a super big defense industry in terms of legal help there yet,
right?
But maybe that'll change. So I think at this point, people with English skills and legal skills are in really high demand from the nonprofit NGO sector, but they're also moving into the government, and that's where we hope they'll go, because the government is such an important part of establishing credibility and security.
It was interesting that we would hear from students who worked as, they used to be a financial advisor for, one of the banks in Kabul, and then all of a sudden they took our commercial law class, and then the next thing they know, they're not a lawyer, but they're the one who's reviewing the contracts for their company because they have the most legal knowledge of anybody who's on that level in the company. And so they were able to take the information and directly apply it in their current jobs, because a lot of them are night students, and so they work during the day.
The project has only been going for a few years now, since 2007, but in that time I think we've accomplished a lot, particularly given the resources and the time constraints that we as law students have. We've produced 5 textbooks at this point that are being taught, a number of courses. We've sort of developed a course proposal for the AUAF to build out a full legal program, and so that's the goal in the next couple years. But just looking back on what we've accomplished in the last few, I think to have written successfully and revised several times, actually 3 books, and to get them translated, which we are in the process of, I think that in of itself is a pretty big accomplishment.
When the program was started, it was because they had seen a void. There weren't any textbooks like this in Afghanistan. There weren't even textbooks in Dari and Pashto. Most classes were just taught by the professor, so the professor relayed the information that he or she knew. Now we've seen other internationally funded organizations begin to write legal textbooks. And so if anything, we've kind of created a new market. And, if they're using ours, we think that's great. But if it's just prompting other people to say, we can write a textbook too, and that means there are more textbooks on the market, then that's fantastic as well. I mean, the more the better. And so I think if we've been able to spur that and kind of set a standard of quality, that's been a major accomplishment too. Yeah, so we have very close relationships with our faculty, and they, 2 in particular who have been with us since the start, Malalai Wasil and Haroon Muatasim, have really taken the books and put them in their own voice and made the courses their own. And we'd like to say that our books are part of the reason why enrollment's so high, but really I'm sure it has to do with them as professors. And both of them are Afghan. Malalai is Afghan American, and they've lived and worked, Haroon his whole life in Afghanistan, and Malalai for the past maybe 5 or 6 years. And they, they do a really great job of putting what we've put into the textbook into the common sense speak and knowledge of their students, and relating to them on a cultural level, and making sure that all of the nuances that we can't capture come across in the classroom. So it's been great to have them, and they help revise our textbooks and give us feedback from both them and the students when they think something isn't quite right, and so we've been able to utilize them to make our books better too.
It's a big question about how legal education can contribute to Afghanistan, and I think there's a number of different ways that it can, and that we think about. One is when we met with the Supreme Court Justice over there on our February trip, he said, this court is neither supreme nor court. We don't have the judges and staff to really administer the system. We don't have a fancy courthouse building. So we can affect the first part of that. We can help train judges and lawyers through the materials that we produce and the classes that we help develop. That's one way, just to build out the infrastructure of actually having a functioning, formalized legal system. But at the same time, I think the legal education contributes to professionals in government, whether they're practicing law or not. And the education that hopefully we can contribute to is one where ethics are very important. Knowledge of the law and how it can be used and how to follow it is really important. And hopefully those skills and that knowledge will be useful and sort of ingrained in the students who graduate from AUAF, so that when they go out and they're practicing in whatever field in Afghanistan, it's sort of part of it as a professional class.
The more knowledge there is out there, the better. And so the more people are aware of the laws as they exist, whether it's somebody who's taken our classes or somebody who's gotten our materials because they have connections to someone in the American military who has our materials, since a lot of the American military uses our materials as well. I think it's just good for people to know what the laws are, and that's one step down the road of building rule of laws, is that people have knowledge. I think that if Afghanistan's going to succeed, it's going to be this generation that we're training right now. And I feel optimistic about them, having met so many amazing, wonderful, excited, and optimistic people there, that it's really up to them to take on the leadership roles from the people who are currently in power and bring with them a sense of integrity and ethics that eliminates culturally the culture of corruption that exists right now. And I think if they can do that and bring what I think they have now with them to their government jobs and their leadership positions, I think that Afghanistan has a really good shot of succeeding.
All of the students on ALEP who visited Kabul have a real appreciation for the students that we met, and they are incredibly optimistic. I think the ones we met were very bright, and I think we have a lot of optimism in the change that they can accomplish. And having visited there, I think we all felt a little different now about the sort of vested interest we have in making sure that something works out there. You know, the people we met, we have real connections and relationships there now, and to see stability or progress reversed or hurt, and to see these people dealing with violence on a day-to-day basis is a lot harder now, and I think we have a greater appreciation for what it means, for why they are so passionate about achieving something in Afghanistan, and the small role that hopefully we can play in helping them.
We have a grant from INL, which is a part of the State Department, and that will carry through I think for at least 2 more years.
The work has kind of grown exponentially as the project grows. We produce more textbooks, and then there's more translations to be done and more outreach to be done. And as the word gets out, we get more and more requests to use the textbooks and for new ideas. And so it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy of creating work for ourselves. But we're bringing on new team members from the 1L class, and the ALEP team is just going to expand to help meet all these different things that we want to achieve. When I came to Stanford, I didn't know that the rule of law programs in the Afghanistan Legal Education Project existed, so I was very pleasantly surprised when I learned about them in my first year. And I wanted to get involved because it sounded like a great way to really make a contribution outside of the law school, and to contribute to this country that we're so intimately involved in a way that really harnessed the skills that I could bring to bear, namely, research and writing.
I actually did know about ALEP before getting to law school, and it sounded like a really cool thing, and I had worked in international development for a year that I deferred law school right before I got here. And so I knew I wanted to continue doing something abroad. And then once I got here and I started looking around at all the different organizations, it became very apparent that ALEP was different, and that the other organizations were great ways to interact with other students and do things on campus, but ALEP was a way to get off campus and do something out in the rest of the world that had real impact. And as one of our other ALEP team members, Jane Farrington, always likes to say, it's the one paper that you'll write for law school that's guaranteed to be read by hundreds of people as opposed to just your professor. So it's nice.
When 9/11 happened, you sat down and you thought, well, what does this mean for me, and what does it mean for my career, and how can I get involved potentially? And this is a very different way than enlisting in the military and going and fighting over there. But I think at the end of the day, it's equally as important. I went to undergrad at Johns Hopkins, and while there I did a year abroad in Italy in international studies, and I majored in international studies, so it was an interest of mine, and I wasn't exactly sure how to pursue it out of school. I left school and worked at a think tank in DC for a couple of years working on energy policy and transportation policy at the federal level. And the policy work I found really interesting, but the path forward is usually with an advanced degree, and I was working with a lot of lawyers at the time who had both practiced and not practiced, and the range of experiences that they had and the opportunities that they had from law school was particularly appealing.
I went to Pomona College and graduated in 2006, and I studied philosophy, politics, and economics, and knew that I was going to go to law school eventually and that I wanted to be a lawyer, but still wanted to work before I came back to school. So I worked at a law firm in DC that did civil rights law called Relman and Dane for 2 years, and then deferred law school a year because I had really loved civil rights law and loved dealing with a lot of or trying to fix a lot of the inequities in our society, but really felt like there were things happening outside of the U.S. that I wanted to know about and do something to help fix. And so I traveled for a year, and I was in Rwanda on the Burma border working with Burmese refugees, and then in Paraguay in South America, and came back and knew that I wanted to use my law degree to do something here at home, but still felt, and I guess I'm still dealing with trying to figure out how to reconcile that with my international interests too. There were a couple of things that really appealed to me. One, very intangibly, was culture. It just seemed like a place where people were happier, and because they were happier, they were doing more things, and people weren't only in the library, studying outside too, but doing other things in addition to just studying. And then I also really liked the idea of going to a small school where I would have the chance to lead an organization like this, and get involved and get to know professors really well. And it's been wonderful to get to know the dean and all of my professors really well, and not have to feel like there are a million people knocking down everyone's door.
I'm originally from Marin, so from the Bay Area, and I wanted to return to the Bay Area, so Stanford had that particular allure. And then the other things it had going for it was its small size. I think it's really great. And it's also part of sort of the entrepreneurial community of Silicon Valley, which has a real draw and attraction, both for clean tech work and for any other sort of entrepreneurial activity you want to do. So I think combining those two with its location is that's what attracted me. So this summer I'm working at Cooley up in San Francisco. I'll be working on a range of things, hopefully. Half the time working with their business law department, doing venture capital and fund formation and startup work, and the other half working on their litigation side with general litigation. So I'm trying to get exposure to clean tech stuff, which is the energy policy side of what I'd done before, and sort of the business side of the policy side. And I'm not sure there'll be any work related to international affairs, but hopefully.
I'm going to be in San Francisco at a private public interest firm that specializes in labor union side law. So I'll be getting some exposure to that because I don't know anything about that yet. And then they also do civil rights law, which I care a lot about. And I think they have a case in the Supreme Court for next term, so I think I'll get to work on that too.